Ante ustedes su humilde servidor Eric Romero, a sus órdenes. Good afternoon. A pleasure to be in front of my computer once again with a larger audience. I am your humble servant Eric Romero. Let me preface this discussion, and I hope it's a discussion. Feel free, feel confident and free to chime in and ask questions and such, and we'll respond. I want to start it off in a general sense to preface. We're going to be speaking about place. We're going to be speaking about culture. We're going to be speaking about story, and we're going to be speaking about Chile. But prior to doing all that, I want to do an acknowledgement. And so if you bear with me, I acknowledge that we are on the ancestral territories of the Tanoan tribes, including the 19 pueblos, the Apache, the Comanche, the Dene, the Kiowa, and the Ute. We pay our respects to elders, both past and present. We also recognize that these people were displaced to accommodate others in the name of progress. With humility, we recognize and respect all indigenous peoples, their histories, and their ties to the land. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to share that land acknowledgement statement, because it's referring to much of what I wanted to speak about, in the idea that much of our traditions, our cultural traditions, and particularly our food traditions, are very much anchored not only in landscape, but in environment as well. And that's what I want to do, is start off a little bit with a bigger history of recognizing how important these elements are. So bear with me. I'm going to go ahead and bring up a slide presentation. And if you'll follow me as we go along with that one. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
We have a presentation. So again, I'm prefacing saying, you know, we want to talk about not only story, but some key questions. And so I'm having fun with this one. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the question, the official state question of red or green. And for our intents, from an academic perspective and from a cultural tradition perspective, I want to introduce another question, north or south, and I'll elaborate a little bit on that. So again, the framing of the presentation is Chile culture, New Mexico food traditions. And it's important to the degree that it's very much part of our markets, part of our commerce, part of our taste, and part of our consumption. This is a photograph from the local Lowe's, and you could see, I think I counted something like 35 varieties of different salsas in and of itself. And so this is truly New Mexico flavor. But let's start off with a more historical anchoring, an academic presentation. Now, when we understand, and we're speaking about Chile, we understand it from a variety of perspectives. One being, and probably the most favorable, the most pedestrian, is recognizing it as a spice. But in addition to spice, we may cover some of these other areas of recognize that in different cultures, in different historical contexts, it has also been used as medicine. It's been used as currency. Contemporary use includes pigment, art. It could be used as a weapon. If you're not familiar, rather than a mace spray now, they use a capsaicin spray for the prevention of assaults, and in law enforcement agencies use it as well. And the question lies could it actually additionally be used as an aphrodisiac? And that one I frame as a question. It's up to you to determine. And again, like I say, please feel comfortable with chat questions or chat comments and such. Again, we want to first of all, take it out of the limits of New Mexico and look at a worldwide application, because it is very much global phenomena. It was internationalized 500 years ago. And so again, you know, we look at ourselves, we look at our use, our identity, and our story around Chile, but it's also very much part of a world story as well. Now, there are different varieties of the chili plant. There are different species. the annum, the capsicum annum, and the capsicum frudensis are the ones that we consume and are part of our cuisine. But there are 5 major species or strata of chili plant. And again, it's from the capsaicin plant. And historically, it gets started out as bird food. There was a dispersal mechanism, a natural dispersal mechanism set in with birds that were eating a very small, the original chili is a tepin, a chili tepin, which is about the size of maybe half of your fingernail on your little finger. And so those get dispersed readily, typically through South America, Central America, Mesoamerica, and even in the northern area of what we now know as Mexico. But part of the important element of them are the capsaicinoids, which is an alkaloid compound. There's actually 22 of them altogether, but the 2 that we find within the chilies that we consume are the capsaicin and the dihydrocapsicum capsaicin. Again, I mentioned they are domesticated as much as 5,000 to 7,000 years BC. So it's a very old plant again. And so that's when there's archaeological suggested determinations of use patterns that could go back as much as 8,000, 9,000 years ago in Central America and South America as well. That's not to say that it's cultivated and domesticated. That comes about a little bit later. Now, last year for the homecoming presentation, I did a presentation regarding food traditions, and we went into that one looking at the larger history of the agricultural revolution in the Americas. And if you were part of that discussion, or if not, you would remember that the agricultural revolution happens about 7,000 years ago here in the Americas, a little bit later than Mesopotamia or other agricultural areas throughout the world. But at the beginning of the agriculture, you had 3 sisters agriculture, corn, beans, and squash. And eventually you have some additional elements that are from hunter-gatherer foraging activities, including chili. So we really don't see it coming heavily into agricultural production until about 4,000 years ago. And I'll come back to it later, but it shows up in New Mexico as much as 3,000 years ago as well. There is evidence that there was chili here, even though it's more considered that it was a Spanish addition to the cuisine, our northern New Mexico cuisine. But it was here. There is archaeological evidence that at least up in Casas Grandes, Paquimé, we have it as much as 4,000, at least 3,000 years ago. Now, again, part of the issue is looking at chili is the ting, the pungency that comes along with it, and recognize that that's because those capsaicinoids, they bind to a particular receptor in the brain, and the taste buds readily recognize them. And if you're not familiar, that there's an endorphin release on the part of the brain. So your brain releases a natural dopamine. So you actually get high on chili. There's an automatic pain relief that comes about as a response for the brain when you bite into something hot. And in particular with these capsaicins, it really sponsors that sort of reaction. So much of the bigger issue is that when you're really eating hot chili, there's a response, a natural response that you respond to the heat. The brain relieves endorphins so as to calm the pain. And if it's prolonged, or if you repeatedly add additional capsaicin to your tongue and your mouth, then you're actually getting high on it. Some people and some of the authors that I've been working with actually claim that there's an addiction, and many of us could claim a chili addiction. So that's part of that identity and cultural configuration. As well, be familiar, there is vitamin C and vitamin A that comes along with that chili high. So there are many benefits besides just the pleasant taste that comes along with eating chili. There's other different kind of values that are anchored with it. Now, I spoke a little bit earlier and mentioned the globalization and the internationalization of this product, and it's certainly part of one of the biggest steps within globalization, which is the Columbian Exchange, by which there's an exchange. The Europeans in their explorations and their colonization practices, they brought many elements, many foodstuffs, and that's the lower arrow that you see on this slide. And the top arrow indicates the different foodstuffs that are brought from the Americas into the old world, into Europe. And again, so as indicated, corn, beans, vanilla, tomatoes. If you're not familiar, tomatoes and potatoes, cacao, pineapple, calabaza, squash, turkeys, those are all native to the America, and they were taken to Europe as part of that exchange. So besides the gold and other artifacts and other material goods, these foodstuffs had a tremendous bearing on the economies of Europe, and that's a whole different history in and of itself, as to how these cultigens and these food products had an impact on European economies and globalization, the continued agricultural shifting within Europe. But for our purposes, we're going to look again, we're going to stay put in the Americas. Now, there's a wide variety, and let's be clear about this, that what I wanted to present about was looking at the big picture of Chile, and then bring it more locally and look at, well, what do we consider to be New Mexico styles, New Mexico strains of Chile? And of course, we will make a suggestion. We will flirt with this idea of whether New Mexico is really the green chili capital of the world, and if there is warrant to our claims that we grow the best chili. We'll speak about that. But in the meantime, recognize there's a lot of varieties. There's over 250 different varieties or species of chili, those of which we eat. In New Mexico, we really have maybe as much as 30 different varieties that are part of our typical diet. And this is what I'm framing by saying north or south, not only the red or green, but the north and south element is how often are we bringing in some of these chilies that are from out of the state. Habanero, if you're looking on the slide presentation, the habanero pepper, as suggested, comes from Havana, Cuba. It's from the Caribbean. Thai peppers were cultivated in Thailand and brought back for commerce purposes into the United States and into the West. And certainly some of the other ones, the jalapeno, the cayenne, Big Jim is certainly New Mexico, Pasilla Poblano. So we're going to play around a lot with this idea that there's a lot of varieties, and depending on both tradition and cuisine, you may be including these types of chilies into your own cooking practice or your own taste interests as well. Now, if you're not familiar, there may be two names to the same chili, one representing a fresh presentation and the other one as it's dried out. And certainly with the maturation of a chili plant, it changes not only color, but it changes in flavor, changes in texture, a variety of changes that come about. So if you're not familiar, a jalapeno, a chipotle pepper, is a jalapeno that's been dried out. And actually a chipotle is also smoked. So poblano is ancho, la chilaca is a pasilla pepper, Anaheim becomes a Colorado pepper, the Mirasol, Guajillo, Serrano becomes a seco, and there's chili de árbol, there's chili japoneses, there's chili piquins, other ones that aren't on this particular diagram. But as well, recognize that the variety is not only in the species and the type of chili, but in the preparation for marketing. Now, these posters came out about 20 years ago, and it's in a similar vein. it kind of gives you a framing of what the fresh chili would look like and what it is once it's dried out, that it comes by a different name. Now, many of these, again, are not that common in a traditional New Mexico cuisine, but have recently been brought in and are incorporated more and more. Not only because we have more international markets that have come into the state, but also taste and the interest of being creative with different kind of foodstuffs, in particular spice and chili. It's allowed us to be creative with some of these cooking designs and having fun with it as well. So again, this is a small list. Nonetheless, it's not representative of the full spectrum of chilies that are out there. Now, this one is another poster that speaks to types of chilies, but included on it is the indication of pungency. Now, pungency, another word, is another word for the heat, the amount of piquete, the amount of hotness that is packed into a pepper. So on the top end up there, you have a bell pepper, which has a Scoville heat unit of 0. The little sweet peppers that you might be familiar with as well, or banana peppers, they really don't have a lot of heat to them, so it's very limited, very minimal, the amount of capsaicin that's in place in the pepper itself. Now, once you take a look at these other ones, you're going to see how this scale gets pretty darn extreme, to the degree that ultimately lately there's been competitions and challenges as far as who could raise the hottest chili. And so again, you know, as you're thinking about this, I hope your eyes don't water in thinking about the amounts of this capsaicin that's found in some of these chilies. So on this, a poblano pepper or a Fresno, which is similar enough to our New Mexico varieties, both our land varieties and our commercialized varieties that come from southern New Mexico. At the high end of the scale, that you might find 10,000 units of capsaicin per gram of chili. Mirasol chili, which you see on that third line there, that's the cultivar that comes out of Colorado. That one's a little bit hotter, a little bit more pungent, almost twice the amount that you find in some of the poblano peppers. And again, I refer that this goes by a particular scale. A guy by the name of Henry Scoville developed this scale for measuring the amount of pungency, the heat in the pepper itself. And so basically what they were doing at the turn of the century, 1900s, is it was a taste test, and they were tasting peppers and making a subjective discussion as far as, you know, how hot they felt it was. Since then, there's been more different types of technical aspects that lend to it, you know, that there's different types of machine-based measurements that may be a little bit more accurate, but they're still going with the categorization, the index of a Scoville scale to measure the amounts. So if you look on this one, that habanero pepper, which is very common now in New Mexico markets, that habanero may run as far as 350,000 units per gram. And so if you measure it, I thought we had a jalapeno. Yeah, we have a jalapeno. So a hot end jalapeno is 8,000. The habanero on that one is almost 5 times the heat of a jalapeno. Now look at the bottom of the page. Has anybody tried a ghost pepper? I'm looking because I had one on my desk. I had tried a little bit this morning just to get my eyes burning and to get really active, get awake, get alive. So that ghost pepper, as suggested on this particular scale, has 1 million units of capsaicin per gram of chili. So that's, more than 1,000 times the heat of a jalapeno. And there's a lot of different kind of jokes about that. How much does the chili burn? I won't share those jokes, but there are, some more quotidian manners of suggesting where that heat is at. Now, the other one, you have a Carolina Reaper. There's another one that's called a Trinidad Scorpion that supposedly has 3 million units of capsaicin per gram of chili. So those are almost impossible to eat. But of course, you have crazy people that eat them in competitions, and they hurt for days afterwards. Either they have iron guts or they purge themselves. Besides the chilies that are for eating or for other intentions, you also have ornamentals, and recognize that here in New Mexico, particularly in the southern part of the state, they're finding a lot of commercial success in working with ornamental peppers. So these can be eaten, and they do have some flavor to them. But the aesthetic that goes with these peppers claim a market of their own. And I have on here, if you're not familiar with the powdery substance here, this is paprika. So part of the chili production in New Mexico is actually destined towards an international market under the name of paprika. So there is a paprika pepper, but it also is a generic name for any kind of red pepper that has a low level pungency to it and is mostly marketed outside of New Mexico. I'm sure my grandmother would roll over in the grave if she were to hear. I'm sorry. If she knew that I was cooking with paprika. Now, again, just another indicator as far as how hot those peppers could be. So this one does have Carolina Reaper, Trinidad Scorpion, and Ghost Pepper. Excuse me. I'm doing my presentation right now. Sorry about that. Anyway, so look at those numbers. That's pretty crazy up there. Jalapeno, chipotle, those could be pretty rough on the palate, but when you really get to those high-end ones, you got to be careful. So again, Wilbur Scoville with the organoleptic test. Now there's something called the high performance liquid chromatograph, HPLC, and that's the industry criteria for measuring. I wanted to go a little bit more and again, take it more international or out of New Mexico and suggest to you that when we're talking about the North and the South, that we also want to go south of the Mexico-US border. We're not just talking about Rio Arriba, Rio Abajo, New Mexico chili, Colorado chili. But look at the chilies that are coming as cultivars out of Mexico and out of Central and South America. And they have their own form of Christmas. Real quick, rhetorical question. How many of you love and adore and can't live without a poblano mole? Mole poblano del estado de Puebla. Oaxaca has a mole, Michoacan has a mole, Chihuahua has a mole. And of course, we have our northern New Mexico style mole. But these are different kind of mole sauces that take a significant amount of work to prepare. And some of them have a lot of ingredients mixed to it, including chocolate. And so therefore that rich, robust flavor and the color of them includes a lot of different varieties. So this one down here, if you could see my little indicator, that one has cinnamon, pumpkin seed, guajillo, and pasilla chilies, has cinnamon and has a a drinking chocolate with garlic that's added into the paste. And if you haven't tried it, it's something to work for. Anyway, so in New Mexico, we do make the distinction, and this is very common, that we look at the differences between the chilies of the north and the chilies of the south. And that's a simple designation of north and south, north or south, but also recognizing that the northern varieties, what we're calling Norteño chili, Rio Arriba, maybe Albuquerque and above, for the better part are landrace varieties. And landrace varieties mean that they're heirloom seed. They've been acclimated to the local environment. In this case, some of these varieties have been here for 400 years, as I mentioned, with the introduction of the Spanish. Now, I mentioned earlier there is evidence of Chile having some very sparse presence in New Mexico, and well, what we call New Mexico now. But there was very limited evidence of it being up here. So even though we had the Three Sisters agriculture, corn, bean, squash, amaranth, other Mesoamerican cultigens that found their way up and made their way north with travelers and seed exchange, there really wasn't that much chili production or chili eating before the Spanish came. So the Spanish reintroduced chili varieties that are coming out of Mesoamerica. And then as they develop into the agricultural communities of northern New Mexico and southern Colorado, those landrace varieties find their own purchase, and they develop in the areas. So the difference being that you have warm days and cool nights, cold water, acequia irrigation, and some of the land-based varieties that we have up here north are Chimayo chili, Velarde chili, Anton Chico. I do like the Anton Chico green, Isleta, Nambe, Zia, which is probably one of the most pungent of the northern New Mexico varieties. And again, I include Mirasol chili from Pueblo, Colorado, and there's some particulars from that, but it is a northern New Mexico variety as well. Now, again, when we're looking at that Scoville scale and look at the pungency, the heat that comes out of chili, at least 70, according to the Chili Institute down in Las Cruces at New Mexico State University. And again, that's the premier chili research institute throughout the world. Their suggestion is at least 70% of the pungency of chili isn't so much genetic, but it's rather immediate environment. And so it's a soil condition, it's water, it's the differences between night and day. So even within landrace varieties and heirloom chilies, there could be a lot of variability within the pungency, depending on soil types and aridity, watering cycles, et cetera, et cetera. So even though when we go make purchase of chilies, we want hot, mediums, or mild, but even within that particular sack, there may be microclimatic differences within the growth of that particular chili plant that makes a difference within the amount of pungency that it eventually produces. Again, so northern New Mexico are mostly heirloom varieties, and they're coming out of subsistence agriculture as in comparison with commercialized production. So there's some big distinctions. In fact, to the degree that it's not very common that you find a heirloom, a land-based variety in northern New Mexico restaurants, because one, there's not that significant of a production. It's small farms, small ranches, small level production. So there's not that consistency of production or that abundance of production so as to support that a restaurant would move their whole menu around in accordance to local product. Even though there is a significant emphasis on using from farm to table and local produce, again, you don't see it as much. And part of that is because in that recognizing, particularly in areas of Taos and Santa Fe, a significant part of the restaurant marketing and the restaurant approach of New Mexico cuisine is for a tourist industry who may not appreciate the same types of innuendo that goes with local chili varieties. They tend more towards the mild chilies. So looking back south, again, you have hot days, maybe a breezy night, and the irrigation of the fields is a warm water irrigation because the water, even though it's coming out of snowmelt, has passed a few days through the sunlight, so it's not the cold water irrigation that we see up north. Now, probably the big significant change that comes about within the southern varieties are certainly the introduction of irrigation technologies that are based on the irrigation from Elephant Dam, Elephant Butte Reservoir, and other different irrigation techniques. So it's more industrial, it's more commercially driven. And the big shift is when Dr. Fabian Garcia develops New Mexico #9, which is a hybrid chili that's a little bit meatier, has a lighter skin, a thicker skin, rather than the northern New Mexico varieties. And again, with the experimentation that takes place at the Chili Institute, you have a whole lot of other different kind of varieties that are now part of our common market. And so the New Mex #5, New Mex Nikki, New Mex Sunset, and again, within our larger history, we get Hatch chili being marketed as the New Mexico chili. It's the most produced, and it's the most marketed. But again, it's not indicative of all the different kind of flavors and tastes that go along with chili. This is an image of Danny Ferrar up in Velarde. And for local varieties of chili, some of those land-based varieties that we mentioned, perhaps a half acre is the size of the field, as opposed to a 5,000 acre field that you would find in the Mesilla Valley, down in Hatch and Deming and Lemitar or Socorro. There's a more high-end production. And so one of the articles I was reading say, we love our chili more because we do a hand pick and a hand loving of our chili fields. And so again, in comparison, northern New Mexico varieties, more heirloom, more out of subsistence farms, and not intended for a larger market. If anything, they go into local markets. One of the big ideas is saying in northern New Mexico, the chili is distributed by a pickup truck, whereas the southern New Mexico varieties are delivered in semi-trucks, fleets of trucks, as to say. And sometimes we make it a point to just have a little bit of chili in our office. You might recognize that that's in Douglas Hall. And last fall, there were 3 little ghost pepper plants that grew off of it, did bear fruit. And unbeknownst to me, somebody did pick them when I wasn't watching. I don't know if they ate them whole or if they were familiar with what they were, but I hope they ate them whole. Again, there's an aesthetic that goes along with this as well. So when we're speaking about New Mexico culture, New Mexico story, New Mexico chili and chili cuisine, you can't help but, appreciate, not only the textures and the flavors, the full sensory experience of dealing with the chili, but even the aesthetics, just these images, the memories that come along with seeing these kind of images are so tremendously profound. So again, there's that aesthetic element of it. I think at this point, the most common icon recognized in New Mexico culture, besides Cocopelli, is some form of a chili or a red or green chili, or the Zia symbol, or more likely when you have the combination of the 3, the Cocopelli, the Zia symbol, and the red and green chili. And if I didn't mention now Cocopelli is part of this story as well. Cocopelli is the image, the icon that you not only find on your shot glasses and your napkins, Every other restaurant has a Kokopali notion to it as well. But Kokopali is, if you're not familiar, the bigger history, the indigenous perspective of it is Kokopali is a fertility god. And as a fertility god, not only brought blessings to local communities, to pueblos that they visited, but also brought seeds. And so the supposed hunchback on the back of Kokopali is suggested that it's actually the backpack of a Posteca, a Posteca group that were the traveling merchants that brought these seeds up from Mexico. So Kokopali supposedly brought the three sisters seeds from Mesoamerica and introduced them to the Southwest, played the flute, got the women pregnant, got the fields fertile, and had a grand history afterwards, has a legacy to speak of. This one here, this is one of the Mirasol varieties. Now, Mirasol is not a singular variety, it's a variety of different species of chilies that grow upward. Mirasol, look to the sun. So there are an upward growing species. And for me, this is Pueblo Mirasol. This is what's grown in the Purgatory, the Cucharas, the Apishapa, and the Arkansas River valleys in southern Colorado. These are some of the chili species that they've been working with for quite some time. It is a northern New Mexico heirloom variety, but grown up there in those particular east-facing or east-flowing rivers. For me, that's what grandma used to cook. So for me, I got to take into consideration, if somebody tells me the best chili, I'm going to go with a very subjective Colorado Mirasol. And go ahead, you could place comment on there if you wish. I'll come to comment in a while. Just a cool image. I ate one of the peppers and made a face afterwards. This is one of the chili roasting that we've done here at Highlands as a cultural traditions experience with our students. And this brings me to my next question. How do you roast your chili? What is the best way of roasting rescoldar? The verb is rescoldar, R-E-S-C-O-L-D-A-R. And so that's a tongue twister when you're trying to conjugate the verb. But the rescoldada may take place in a variety of forms. So besides the cage image that you see up there, there's other forms, certainly using a bread oven with a longer, slower cook serves its purpose. When I'm dealing with some of my batches of chili, I like to work with them as an individual pod. That way you get it perfect because you're calibrating. Each one of the pods is according to what it needs. I run the joke that I love each one of my chilies when I'm roasting them myself. Actually, let me ask that. Anybody have a comment? Which is the best way? Horno, grill. Miss Montoya says the best way is to let somebody else do it. Darlene, you've tried Mirasol. I know Joni ate some too. Laura, Laura, you did try one of the ghost peppers, I guess. And Darlene, if I could respond, you're not a trader. Colorado is northern New Mexico. So you didn't step out of New Mexico when you ate that Mirasol chili. Oh, Dr. Valenzuela says right there on the comal. Laura says the grill. Individually love those peppers. Joni likes it roasted for her as well. Comal, comal. Yeah, that's the thing is like when you do it individually and right there on the spot, it makes a difference. It's something to work with. Next question. Wait. How do you freeze your chili? Casing on or casing off? Do you peel your chili before you freeze it, or do you wait and take it out individually and toil with the individual peeling as you're unfreezing your chili, using it at that point? And of course, I mentioned here again, you know, that's a common discussion, and it's not only a kitchen discussion, it's a store discussion, it's an over the back fence discussion, it's a flea market discussion. How do you prepare your chili? And of course, we also, part of our preservation techniques includes grinding, canning, and other forms of drying. One of my grandmothers used to do what they call tasajos. A tasajo is red chili, or I'm sorry, green chili, roasted and peeled, and then hung over the line so that it would dry green. And so you would have a hard green pepper that could be reconstituted or ground up and such. And so that was a tasajo. I don't see a lot of that down here. Maria says you keep the skin on because it sweats better, it preserves better, and it maintains flavor. I've heard of that one as well. Joni peels and chops hers to have it available in the freezer, and it saves space. Num num. Peel first and freeze, Emily. Peeled and de-seeded, says Miss Varela. And of course, you could invite friends or student organization members over to help out with some of those aspects. And just to have some fun with it, I got sent this image, and I think it's indicative of this identity issue as well, that I make the relationship. Recipe and story and identity are all tied in within a larger picture of understanding what we eat, what we grow, what we articulate with is part of our essence. You know, again, not only in the sense that when you eat something, it becomes part of your metabolism, part of your body function, but this deep-rooted area of foodstuffs and food tradition being a tradition. Now, if you're familiar with the word cuisine, when you speak about cuisine, cuisine isn't a recipe. Cuisine is a variety of different combinations of science and art that you learn in a cultural setting. You know, I make the equation culture, community, communication, story, foodstuffs, they're all very much tied in together. So to the degree that you have these traditions in place and you add a story to them, that's some of the more powerful cookbooks, some of the more elaborative cookbooks that you find don't just give you a recipe. They're telling you a story. They're giving you a history. They're anchoring that food preparation technique. It's anchored within a milieu of other different essences and a contextualization that really gives you a deeper felt feeling of what it's like to share in that recipe. And of course, it could be to the degree that recipe sharing causes competition, it causes antagonism. There may be copyright and patent issues that go along with it as such. Anything that, anything that has value, we tend to protect, and we're guarded in our sharing. But recipes may be one of those issues where we do some sharing out of a sense of pride and shared identity. And it's a little bit easier to share with those that are outside of your circle if you understand that they're going to be respectful and appreciate it and do a transformation of your recipe with a whole load of respect. Okay, this is just some of the resources that I used in pulling together this particular presentation. But I recognize I am running out of time, and let's go ahead and let me bring closure to my aspect of the presentation and ask if there's any questions or comments. Otherwise, quedo ante ustedes, su servidor, Eric Romero.
What is your favorite chili?
Colorado Mirasol.
Yeah.
Again, like I say, that's a chili I'm most familiar with. I was raised on that. So in the manner of probably, I asked my mom if at one time they used to put chili in our baby oatmeal, because for me, it's always been part of the cuisine. It's always been there. It's been ubiquitous. But now that we do the chili roasting here at Highlands, I'm hoping that we could get some of the bags, some of the sacos of the Colorado Mirasol, so we could do some taste testing and some blind experimentation and check people to see what they find best.
Dr. Romero, I put a comment in the chat. I wanted to know, how do you freeze your chili?
Let me see. Hold on a second. I'm going to check to see if a Renee Kathleen Romero is out there in the audience. I guess she's not. So my wife does most of the work. I do